Hey everyone, Dagna here with Mindful Dev, and today I have an awesome interview to share with you, and I want to make sure that it comes out in March, as March is celebrating women's history. So I have someone that I interviewed that meant a lot for me as I was growing in my career, was an example of a female leader in the industry, and I had the pleasure to work with. This person is going to tell us about her career journey, how individual contributor role is different from management position, from a director position, from a VP position. And this interview has so much value in terms of, okay, what do I need to know? How can I prepare myself if this is the career path that I'm considering for myself? So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, hey everybody, Dagna here with Mindful Dev, and today my guest, Pinky Parsons. Pinky is going to help us understand how she got from an individual contributor role to a director position, and how someone who is wanting to go in that route can prepare themselves being in that individual contributor role. Welcome, Pinky.
Thanks, Dagna. Thank you so much for having me, and hi out there.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you decided to join in and agree to being interviewed for the YouTube channel. So for everyone listening there, Pinky and I had the opportunity to meet at a meetup. Long before we actually started working together, we had a chance to work together at the same team. And I remember that when we were on the same team, I really felt good about it. First of all, having a female leader on my team. And second of all, I feel like you really took the time to understand what was going on and create that personal connection with the people that you worked with. So that's something that really stood out to me, and I love the fact that we stayed in touch after our ways had separated. So why don't you start by telling us what got you into software engineering?
Yeah, so I got into software engineering because it was in my DNA a little bit. My dad worked for IBM as an electrical engineer in the 80s and 90s, and in the 70s. He had a long career there. And so I was raised in technology. He was bringing it was the age of PC computers, home computers. And so he was bringing them home. And I had a computer in my house really early on in my life, which was unusual back then. So I was exposed to it very early on. My older brother got into programming and did really well in it. And I had an interest, and that's when, in the mid-90s, web development really became a thing. And with GeoCities and some of those other pre-MySpace, pre-Facebook, like kind of easy ways to get into putting stuff out on the internet, I got really into that. And I decided I wanted to be a web developer. And so I decided, all right, well, one way to do that is to go to college and get a computer science degree. I actually really struggled with that, took a break and went to art school because they had a multimedia web design program. We didn't have code schools back then. So that was the closest thing to a code school, but they didn't actually teach any code. So I got really frustrated and was like, okay, well, it's either art or science. Like, I went art science. That's really what I found interesting about programming. And so I ended up taking a break, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and ended up deciding to go back to UNC Charlotte to finish my degree because I'd already had most of my credits to graduate. I only had like 18 months left, a year and a half. And I wanted, by that point, I decided the degree was important just to finish something, and it would bump up my pay. At that time, degrees were pay worthy. I don't know that that's necessarily the case anymore. Okay. But back then it was. And so I did that, and somebody took a chance on me. I actually realized that I kind of worked for free for a little bit as an engineer.
Wow.
Under the guise of a help desk analyst. So my main job was help desk analyst or help desk technician. And, write the intranet for us, please. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do that. And looking back, I'm like, holy cow, I was doing that work for free. But it gave me experience. I was willing to do whatever. And it didn't, it really didn't bother me because I had a paycheck, the work was interesting, and I got to do whatever I want with the intranet. Like, really, again, before we had intranets and companies like we do today. And so that was how I got in on the ground level. So I encourage everyone, every software engineer, any person who wants to get into software, help desk is a great place to start because you learn a lot of fundamentals that are carried on into other jobs.
And I want to kind of like interject here for a second, because you mentioned how you struggled with your college degree. And oh my gosh, when I started my college degree, which was control engineering and robotics, I had to have programming classes because that's how Polish universities look like. Everything is very structured, it's scheduled. You don't really choose the classes that you want to study. You have like a set curriculum. So I had no way but to have programming classes. And I absolutely hated programming. So when I graduated from college, I was like, yes, I will never have to program again. I'm in. Yeah, that's fantastic, right? And then lo and behold, a few years down the road, I'm like, you know what? Actually, let me try and become a software engineer, a programmer. And that's when I made my transition. And what happened was, as I started working, I was really lucky to work with people who taught me what programming really was about, and I fell in love with it. So, whoever's out there struggling, yes, it's going to be really hard at the beginning to just get the grasp of things. But once you get it, once it clicks, it's just so much easier from there. So it's really important to have that grit and that perseverance at the very beginning.
Before we move on, because you hit on a point that is really important and that struck me through my early career. What I learned in college and the type of programming I was doing in college was not the type of programming that I was passionate about. So I was writing C and C++, and I hated it. I wanted to write web pages. And so I would sit at home writing HTML, trying to figure out this JavaScript thing, and was really struggling with the distinct differences that those two sets of languages had. And that's why I think we're in a much better place from hey, there are all these languages out there. They're not just the things that, not just these two things that everybody should know, because in order to be an engineer, you have to know how to write C. That's not the case. It really is about finding a language and a set of outcomes that I was interested in. And for me, it wasn't even JavaScript. JavaScript didn't even really ring my bell. It was when I discovered Java, and ASP.NET was really where I turned the corner and was like, yes, because now I have a full-blown object-oriented language that I can write web applications for. So finding that passion, that language, and kind of the outcomes that you're going for was really key in powering through I just got to get through these last couple of courses in this computer science program to get to what I want to actually do.
Awesome. Now, we kind of went back in your career. Let's move a little bit forward. So you're a software engineer. How did you get that first promotion to being, in a management seat?
Yeah, so it was a struggle. It really was difficult to convince my managers to promote me and give me the leadership opportunity. I had to demonstrate, there were several things that I had to do. I had to demonstrate leadership without being given the role. So stepping up in and speaking up in meetings, running meetings, because that was something that senior engineers were expected to do anyway. And so the more I could do that, the more, even as the junior engineer, I was very active and vocal in meetings. And then as I got a little more comfortable with what we were doing and given some opportunities to be the senior engineer on projects, then I could lead meetings, and leading those meetings and showing initiative That's a huge aspect of leadership at the in your earlier stages. I don't like saying lower levels because it's really not about hierarchy. It really is about maturity, what phase of your career you're in, what you're after. And so, demonstrating that leadership early on and then showing initiative, like, oh, hey, I saw this problem. I solved it in this way. Oh, and I had to go get buy-in from 3 other stakeholders to do that. So not just, oh, I did this thing, look at me, I've worked extra hours, but like that collaboration with other people is key, because management is a lot of that, like way more of that than if you've never been a manager, you really, well, I'll put it in terms of me. Not having been a manager, I had no idea how important that communication with other people and bringing people into the conversation and getting buy-in and that proactive collaboration, that was really important. So those 2 things, demonstrating leadership through initiative and my external collaboration, if you will. And then I had to talk to them about it. I started asking, how do I get to be a team lead? How do I get to be a manager? I want, my career path is upward trajectory. And I did just say that, like, it's not about lower or upper, but like, I'm trying to climb the ladder. How do I do that?
Speak, you just needed to say it so they would understand, right?
Yes, exactly, right? How do I move up? How do I get a promotion? Being very vocal about that, not in the once a year reviews or the once a quarter reviews, but in every one-on-one, like, because a lot of it is being given the opportunity to, oh, hey, we have this initiative, we do want you to lead it, and this will give you more experience to be a team lead, and eventually they decided I was ready, or I convinced them I was ready, and they promoted me to a team lead. Now, to get to the more manager, like the HR manager level, there was a point in my career where to get to the HR manager position, I had to force my company's hand a little bit by going out and finding somebody who would hire me as a manager to lead teams and to be that. So, it wasn't intentional. I wasn't going out and saying, hey, you need to give me this job and I'm going to go use this as leverage. I mean, I did use it as leverage, but it wasn't out of spite, right? I was like, hey, look, if this isn't the place for me to get that role, I've told you I want that role. I've told you this is where I'm going. So if you can't give it to me, if it's not right for me here, because that's totally a thing, I'm not always the right manager or leader for a team, then I'm going to go find a team where it is right for me so that I can continue to grow. And I had that conversation and my boss was like, whoa, we didn't realize, like, we had some stuff in the works and just hang out. And I said, can I get that in writing? Because I've heard that before and I need a written, like, I need to know what the timing is. I need the timing in writing. I need the dollar amount in writing. We negotiated all of that. And I need a commitment, because I've now done all this work and have told these companies that I'm interested and I have offers on the table. So it was not comfortable in a lot of ways, because I would have preferred to just move up the ladder, right, and them have that faith in me, but that wasn't the case. So that's how I got into management. That is not going to be everybody's path. I think where we are as a culture, like a corporate culture, we're much more open, and most companies anyway are much more nurturing, particularly of marginalized people in tech. And I recognize that I have a lot of privilege in my whiteness and my education and how I was raised, the background that my family comes from. And so that I recognize that I also had some privilege in being able to say some of those things to my white male bosses, right? As I've always been white men. And so yeah, it's going to be different for everyone, and it can be a challenge to make that leap from IC or team lead, where there's not really an HR, but people report to you, but you don't talk about salaries and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Making that leap to where you're determining their salary and that kind of management can be more difficult.
So I think the main thing that surfaced here is that, first of all, you need to have people that are willing to support you in your career progression and can actually, like in the meetings that you're not in, really vouch for you and say, yes, she's ready, she's a great candidate, we should promote her. And you need to be given the opportunity in order to be able to display all those leadership and communication qualities, right? And then another thing that came to mind is, because you did mention that you were a team lead first that didn't have those managerial responsibilities. And I guess a lot of companies are understanding that management is not the calling for everyone. So they're giving people the opportunity for leadership positions like an architect or a staff or principal engineer. But those roles, even though you're not technically managing people and talk about salary and you're not maybe firing or hiring, you are still required to have those leadership skills to kind of like drive the vision or idea forward. And you still have to collaborate with people, right? Because you cannot be just like behind your computer doing your own thing and then expecting everybody to just follow just because of your position, right?
Right. Yeah, that's such a great point. And you hit on something that I really did gloss over, and that was my advocates. Because I did have a couple, and this is not to discount any of the bosses I had, but I really only had one boss at the company where I did make the leap into management. I had one boss that really understood and really truly wanted me to succeed. I had other bosses at that same company tell me that they didn't see me as a manager. They saw me as, I don't even remember what they said they saw me as, or he saw me as, but he was like, I don't see you in that role at all. And I was like, he said that to my face, and I was just kind of taken aback, like, oh, well, what did you think I was trying to do here, even though I've told you I want that role? Mm-hmm. And so he was, again, not knocking him, but that was his bias, right? And he's an old school, he's still around, and he's a great guy. I would totally have dinner with him and great person. But some of the stuff he said to me was very challenging to my ego and very disconcerting at times, because it did feel like I was being marginalized because I was a woman. And it wasn't even that he was conscious of it, but he didn't see many women in that role. So why would he see me in that role? And I was very young, and I still I present young. And so seeing a young woman in a leadership role is still a leap for a lot of people, men and women. But it's not a leap for everyone. So I had to find those people. I had to find those advocates, the men in the room who could go golfing with him, right? The other boss, right? Mm-hmm. They would go golfing together, and he could advocate for me in that kind of a scenario, right? He could advocate for me in that, I really think, you should consider Pinky for this, or, Pinky's doing a really great job with these other things. She would be really great. Those skills apply directly to whatever. And so I've collected those people at every job I've gone into, making sure that I have allies and advocates, particularly white men, on the various teams at the company that we worked at, the company before that. Every company, I found a couple of peers and allies in different parts of the company, so that I can say, hey, yeah, what's going on with you? Here's what's going on with me. We're doing amazing things. Let's make sure that your boss hears what I'm doing, and my boss hears what you're doing. So there's a lot of mutual benefit to it as well. But it really does help me in overcoming some of the boundaries that we typically are faced with.
So I guess touching on that point, because I think this is critical, right? Being a minority in tech, so basically anyone who's not a white male, like how do you find those allies? How do you find those people that can elevate and support you? What do you tell them? Can you do that in an interview setting, or is it only feasible once you already landed a job? How can you spot a job that is more likely to have allies than not?
That is such a great question, because that is part of my interview process. Like when I am interviewing for jobs, I'm interviewing them. I've actually had people comment like, I think you're a better interviewer than I am, like where I'm being interviewed for the job, but I'm asking all the questions. And I think that guy was a little put off, and it took like, that's not a good, that was an immediate, like, that's not going to be a good fit because I'm sitting here asking all the questions. So when I'm interviewing, that is absolutely something I'm looking for, especially when I'm meeting, if you're meeting with people in different parts of the business, what is that interaction like with that one person? That might not be the person that I make that contact with, but talking to that person, talking to the engineering teams, talking to the product teams, I can get a sense for how open they are, how transparent they are, how well do they collaborate with engineering departments. Honestly, I have found that the more walled off an engineering group is, the better it is for me to go out and make contact with the other groups, because the other groups want it so much. Like everybody, yeah. So like it's kind of opposite of what you would think. When an engineering team is like, we've kept the engineers locked away and we don't let them talk to sales, we don't let them talk to product. Like those kind of, like, that's ripe for my skill set, because I can come in and say, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to call up sales and I'm going to set up a one-on-one with a couple of people, and whoever wants to come and talk about it. It could be that. It could be, finding out who in the sales team or the product team, or I don't usually do it with HR, but even finance, accounting, I can usually identify somebody who's either been at the company for a while or has an interest in collaborating across teams, and start up a conversation, have coffee and say, hey, what do you do here? How do you fit in? What could engineering do better? Like, what do you see? What is your view of the engineering team? Because so often we get, like, engineers, we get so frustrated. Yeah, we get siloed away. We get very frustrated. Nobody sees what I'm doing. Nobody values it. And, sales just cares about sales. They're just selling whatever they want. And blah, 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 we get really frustrated because we're like, I just did what they said and what the customer said. And the reality is they're frustrated too, because, man, I never get to see them. And we never get to have a conversation around, like, here's what the feedback from the customer was, or like, is what I'm selling even reasonable, right? I've had that conversation. And I'm like, no, it's not. Why aren't we having that conversation? So I've found that, like, it's really easy for an engineer to go out into an organization and just say, hey, I want to know more about what your team does and how you work and what's your perception of engineering, and what if we talked once a month and just caught up on what your team is doing and my team is doing? Because I guarantee you'll learn something new about the company, about yourself, at the minimum about somebody else.
So I have two things that I want to kind of like build on that. And one of them was, I remember we had Slack that we used for company meetings and everything. And the moment that we had that integration with Donut, that was amazing because it would randomly pair two people from the company from different departments who were unlikely to talk to each other on a daily basis. So anyone out there using Slack, I totally highly recommend using Donut because it was super awesome to like bring those people together, especially now in that remote setting. So that was one thing. The other thing was something that I do right now with my coaching clients, which is really important for them to really understand how they fit in the whole machinery of business as an engineer, is exactly to have those conversations. It helps to build business acumen, but it also incredibly helps with communication, because the moment that you're speaking, having in mind the person that you're speaking to, their priorities, and having in mind what they care about, that's when you're able to convince them to your ideas, to pitch them ideas, to get them on board and do something together. But you have to first get into that mindset of understanding what this other person is doing and what are their priorities. And the moment you can understand that, you can then use it back, reflected back to them, mirrored back to them in communication, and become a more effective communicator. So I'm glad that you brought it up. Now let's go back a little bit.
And the donut plugin in Slack is actually what prompted me to kind of formalize my proactive, like, hey, I'm going to go meet with people. As director of engineering at Passport, we had started the donut pairing, and it was random, and I thought, what if I connected with some very specific people, like the other directors, the director of client success, the VP of client success, right? And what about the VP of product, and people who I don't normally interact with in my main circles, and so that it was huge. It was huge because it not only gave me the practice and talked, and addressed the things you talked about, Dagna, but it also built my reputation in the company. And that goes way beyond anything any other advocate can do for you. When you build your reputation by, like, hey, she's a collaborator, she's a team player, she's thinking outside the box, she's really trying to get to know, like, the business acumen, like that stuff. I mean, CEOs, at least at startups, love that. So
awesome. That's amazing. So touching on that, let's go a little bit back, because we did talk about your transition to a team lead role and to becoming a manager of a team. How did that prepare you for a director position? And with that in mind, how is a director position different from whenever you're in an engineering manager or a team lead role and you only manage your own team? Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah. So the biggest difference, and this applies up and down that ladder, right? So going from individual contributor, IC, to team lead means, okay, I'm responsible not just for getting my work done, because that's what individual contributor, I get my work done, I focus on my tasks, maybe I'm helping the team, but it's very much in a peer helping kind of thing. As team lead, started to gain responsibility of the team needs to deliver something, right? The team needs to be prepared to hit a date or finish a feature or whatever it was. And I have to get my work done, right? So, and part of my work, it may be writing code, it may be doing documentation, and ensuring that the rest of the team is delivering on their commitments, on our commitments. As manager, that's your scope of control. My scope of control was increasing. So, and influence and responsibility and accountability, all the fun words that start to make these jobs really sticky, and time consuming, because it's, as a manager, I was now collaborating across teams because my team needed I then had some teams, had multiple teams, generally multiple projects happening, maybe 15, 20 people. And So the responsibilities are not just for, I have to get my work done. Now I don't have as much time to write code. At that point, I was still writing code. There's a lot of that management level that still has to be technical and has some deliverables in terms of like software. But at that point, starting to spend more time ensuring that each team is delivering on their project deliverables. At director, I'm managing managers. So, going up another level. And that is really no longer individual contributor. I had no capacity to sit down and write code because I had 4 teams. I don't know. It's 4 or 5 big projects going on, amongst 4 or 5 teams, and then all of the initiatives. So we start getting into more strategy. At director level, you also have to have some vision for how those teams are going to work, because everybody's looking up to, by that point, I'm coming up with what's the process? What process are we going to follow? Yes, we follow Agile. Yes, we follow Scrum. But as we all know, anybody who's worked in that environment, you probably understand that how we do that is a little different on every team. And at director, I need all of my teams doing things at least a little bit the same so that we can report and, I can answer to the VP and the CTO or the COO. And so I had to have some vision for what does my 30 or 40 person team do, and director could be hundreds of people, depending on what company you go to. But that's the case at every level. So VP is another level of vision, strategy, because each initiative gets bigger and bigger. So I'm no longer responsible for a feature or a bug fix. I'm no longer responsible just for a release. I'm responsible for maintenance of an entire platform and, frameworks and public distribution and major multi-million-dollar initiatives. And it gets bigger and bigger every time you move up. VP is that another step up where there's more responsibility, more strategic thinking, which quite honestly is where I had a lot of challenge. I still have a lot of challenge, like that, making that leap from director to, okay, what does the 5-year plan look like? What should a 5-year plan look like? And if you start to get there, some people start to get there, but not everybody does. Not everybody is well equipped to think like that, which is why not everybody makes it to CEO or C-level, because that's, again, a whole nother level. And in a lot of companies, there are a bunch of levels in between that director and C-level. So there are quite a few differences, and it really does. I use circles because it's the easiest way to understand, because it encompasses, like, okay, as an individual contributor, I'm responsible for this, and it's about this big. And, team lead is maybe this big, manager is this big, director is this big, and you start getting kind of exponential in terms of moving up the ladder and moving out, and like, oh, you have all this stuff. So we may complain that CEOs make a whole lot of money for doing what, but like, they have a lot that they have to do. As director of engineering, it did become more demanding on my time. VP, like, you, especially in tech, if you're a 24/7 shop, which if you're global in any way, or if you're, across the nation, that's a better part of 24 hours. You're going to be on call a lot. You're going to have to be available to address whatever thing is happening, whether it's a failed deployment or a major outage, or a cyber breach. There's a lot of responsibility the further up you go. So
it really feels like the question here would be, if someone is thinking on going into that particular path, is how do you see your appetite for responsibility, for the unknown, for having the responsibility for the people, not just the product, but the product or the products as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of curious, in terms of leadership, there's from what you said, and especially I really like the circle analogy. It also shows you that, there's growth happening. So with that being said, are there any specific books that helped you grow in your leadership? So you would be able to feed that monster or grow your appetite to the level that you're oh, okay, this book helped me prepare myself for being a leader at that specific level in a company setting.
Yes, most definitely. And I can share my leadership Goodreads list with
awesome.
You. And
we can just link it down below in the YouTube video. Perfect.
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind, hands down, is The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Okay.
Yeah. He talks about being a CEO. If you don't know Horowitz, he's a kind of a legend in tech because he's now the Horowitz and Andreessen Horowitz, the venture firm. And that book summarizes what it's like to be a leader in all of the hard things about being a leader, having to make decisions about firing people, having to make decisions about laying people off, because I've had to fire people. I've had to tell somebody that they no longer have a salary, even though their kid's in the hospital and their wife doesn't work or whatever it is. I've had to tell people, you no longer have a job here and good luck. And that be it. I can't, that's how it goes. And so that's a really difficult thing to do. We say all the time, I'll just fire that guy. Okay, well, you sit down and you have that conversation. It's not as easy because you have people's lives in your hands, right? Having to make product decisions. You mentioned that. Horowitz talks a lot about having to cut products, having to let go of things that he was passionate about, products that he was really invested in, people that he was really invested in. And these decisions are not easy. He actually mentions you probably, as CEO, you probably have about 10% of the information that you need to make a good decision.
Wow.
And
that's not a lot.
Yeah. No. And so to make a decision based on 10% of the information, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, I won't say it's guessing because there are calculations that go into it. There's a certain amount of risk that is part of it, but that's the hard thing about hard things. So that book for sure, Hard Thing About Hard Things. And then my go-to, it is a book that I reference all the time in just about every conversation, whether you realize it or not. But it's a book by Chris Voss, and it is called Never Split the Difference. Negotiate as if your life depended on it. And he was a former FBI negotiator, and really high stress hostage situations. He did not always win the negotiation, and he developed all of these techniques out of that experience and wrote a book about it. And he draws on Daniel Kahneman's research, who, if you want a little more dense read, that's Thinking Fast and Slow. Read Voss's book first because it's just amazing and it's really approachable. All the stories he tells are great. But it's changed how I communicate because every conversation is a negotiation in a way. I've seen you use these techniques where you repeat back, you rephrase. I read the book. You've recommended it to me before. Yeah, and it's so simple to integrate those into a conversation and demonstrate that you're listening to somebody and genuinely connect and drive the conversation forward and see it flower in a really beautiful way. So I've used that book for salary negotiations. I've used it for coaching negotiations. I've used it just in conversation where I'm trying to get better at listening and I'm trying to connect with somebody that maybe isn't my favorite person, and just really trying to understand where they're coming from. So, which I think is key in business, no matter what level you are. But those two books, Hard Thing About Hard Things and Never Split the Difference.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Pinky, for your time today, for all the advice that you shared. And I'm thinking how to nicely wrap this up. Really appreciate having you today and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good luck.
Take care. Awesome. That's the end. Thanks for staying till the end. I hope you enjoyed watching or listening to this interview just as much as I did. And give me a favor, just hit like and subscribe in case you want to be notified of more interviews that are coming to this YouTube channel. And if you're looking for someone to be in your corner that can support you as you grow in your career, go to themindfuldev.com/strategy call so we can check out how you and I can potentially work together as you grow in your career. Good luck, stay tuned, and cheers to your success. That was good.